and as the Federal Reserve raises interest rates to tame inflation, it is running at its fastest pace in more than 40 years. Carrying a balance a month after month will soon even cost more money than it does now. Since most credit cards have a variable rate, there's a direct connection to the Fed's benchmark. As the federal rate rises, the prime rate does as well, and credit card rates follow suit. Annual percentage rates are currently 16% on average. Folks, I want to know your thoughts on this. Is President Biden doing all that it takes to send out the fourth stimulus payment, or do you believe he needs to do a better job on this? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. So guys, we have a ton of good news about the fourth stimulus check that I want you to know. Continue watching this video because you definitely don't want to miss out on this. The Labor Department has released a shocking announcement. The Biden administration is working with state governments to approve a new round of stimulus checks, and that's the news that we want to hear. Economists are pushing for at least $1,000 relief payments. President Biden has released a new announcement today. During a news conference, Biden said that the United States has never seen anything like Putin's tax on both food and gas. His remarks come after the Labor Department announced Friday that inflation has hit a new 4-decade high in May. The Labor Department said that CPI index, the consumer price index that is, a broad measure of the price of everyday goods, includes gas, groceries, and rent, it rose 8.6% in May from a year ago. Prices have jumped 1% in the 1-month period from April, and those figures are both higher than the 8.3% headline figure and 0.7 monthly gain forecast. It marks the fastest pace of inflation since December of 1981. The president said fighting inflation is his top economic priority, and Biden also said America can tackle inflation from a position of strength unlike any other country in the world, adding that every other country in the world is getting a big bite and a piece of inflation. Biden administration officials have called for lowering prescription costs, which he said would fundamentally affect the well-being of every family. The Labor Department said that price increases were widespread. Energy prices rose 3.9% in May from a previous month, and were up 3.4% from last year. Gas on average costs $48, 48% higher than it did a year ago. In all, fuel prices jumped 17% in May on a monthly basis, pushing the 1-year increase to a stunning 100%. In another worrisome sign, the shelter costs accelerated in May. It marked the fastest 1-month gain since 2004. On an annual basis, shelter costs have climbed 5.5%, the fastest since February 1991. Scorching hot inflation has created several financial pressures for most U.S. households, which are forced to pay more everyday necessities like food, gas, and rent. The burden is disproportionately borne by low-income Americans, which already stretched paychecks are heavily impacted by price fluctuations. Rising prices are eating away the strong wage gains that American workers have seen in recent months. The real average hourly earnings decreased by 0.6% in May from the previous month, as the inflation increase eroded from the 0.3% total wage gain. On an annual basis, real earnings actually dropped 3% in May. Rampant inflation has become a major political liability for Biden ahead of the midterm elections, in which Democrats are expected to lose their already thin majorities.
Gentleman from California.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentlelady from Michigan. I rise in support of Recovering America's Wildlife Act. This is a proactive piece of bipartisan legislation that would help our state and tribal fish and wildlife agencies with the recovery and conservation of close to 12,000 species of fish, wildlife, and plants. Now, I support this bill not only as a United States representative for the Central Coast of California, a district that values and cherishes our wildlife, but also as the vice chair of the Congressional Sportsman Caucus, as some of the most passionate wildlife conservationists across our country. Many sportsmen and women, including those in the Congressional Sportsman Foundation, no matter what their political persuasion, support this critical piece of legislation. In addition to enhancing the Pittman-Robertson and Dingell-Johnson Acts, sportsmen and women want to ensure that our species are protected and perpetuated. From bighorn sheep to the Sierra Nevada red fox, from the California condors to the coho salmon, and from moose to monarch butterflies, the intent of this legislation is to protect those and thousands of other iconic animals well before they need to be listed as endangered or threatened. This way, rather than impose burdensome and costly regulations on fish and wildlife managers, sportsmen and women, and private businesses, those species can be recovered and renewed well before any measures are mandated. Look, it's estimated that it costs the federal government more than $19 million on average to recover a single species once it is...
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the Biden administration abandoning tariffs on imported solar companies is terrible. What is the administration's strategy to protect American companies and American workers who are going to be harmed? First Solar and Solar Toledo, Ohio companies whose products are unrivaled anywhere on earth, are at risk with thousands of workers, jobs on the line. These firms employ hardworking Ohioans earning living wages that support themselves and their families, and it's unacceptable to allow China to lay waste to American industries. China has violated the rules and tilted the playing field in its favor. Our workers are sick of it. I've introduced the bill to create the Office of Manufacturing within the White House to champion good jobs in the USA. This bipartisan bill would ensure there's an explicit long-term plan to grow American manufacturing industries and unleash our full manufacturing potential. Domestic manufacturing is the backbone of our region's middle class, and it's time the federal government recognizes enough is.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding and for her leadership on this issue. I rise in support of the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, bipartisan legislation I'm proud to co-sponsor that aims to make the most significant investment in wildlife and habitat conservation in a generation. Across Washington state, across our whole country, we're facing widespread species decline that doesn't just threaten the health of our ecosystems, it threatens the recreation and tourism and fishing industries that our communities rely on. That's why Democrats and Republicans support taking bold action to implement conservation efforts, to conserve and restore habitat, to reintroduce native species, and to mitigate wildlife risk. This bill is critical to helping our state and our tribal wildlife managers put conservation measures in place to protect species before they become threatened or endangered. On top of that, this bill will help us combat threats to ecosystems, including the European green crab, an invasive species that is destroying essential marine habitat for Dungeness crab and Pacific salmon, and threatening our shellfish industry that so many of the families that I represent depend on. Get this, last year more than 102,000 European green crabs were caught in Puget Sound and along Washington's coast. That was an astronomical 5,500% increase from 2019. In response to that explosion in the green crab population, a series of disaster declarations were made by the Lummi Nation and the Makah tribe concerning the green crab's impact on tribal culture and on their economies, and another disaster was declared by the state of Washington to mobilize more resources. While our tribes and states and local partners and small businesses are working diligently